2006 was an interesting year. You had Kobe Bryant scoring 81 points against the Toronto Raptors, still second most since Wilt's 100-point game, those of war in Lebanon, and most importantly, Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest came out. Still my second favorite movie in the series. I mean, Davy Jones is just perfect. But on July 22nd, a new prehistoric documentary aired on ITV called Prehistoric Park. Prehistoric Park was a six-part series following conservationist Nigel Marven, who goes back in time to save extinct species from extinction to keep them in a conservation park in Africa. Prehistoric Park is one of my personal favorite paleo documentaries for a number of reasons, which I'll get to in my review. Also, we get to watch Nigel Marven for 6 hours, so you know it's about to be a good time. Episode 1, T-Rex Returns. T-Rex Returns is the introduction to Prehistoric Park and how this time-traveling thing works. It seems to be some device that Nigel can place down and a portal to wherever you want to go, and it will send you there. Nigel is very set on starting his adventure off in the Hell Creek Formation in the last days of the Cretaceous to save the species of Tyrannosaurus rex. Nigel soon realizes that he will bring a lot more with him than just the Tyrannosaurus, however. The first dinosaur they come across is a group of ornithomimimus, and yes, Prehistoric Park is trying to be an educational documentary, so I will bring up gripes every now and then when something is very inaccurate, and that something is as clear as the ornithomimimus. This design is awful. It suffers from the worst dinosaur portrayals of all time. It has the typical bald and featherless look, basically looking like a plucked ostrich, and it also has pronated wrists, which hurt my soul to look at. Also, the Hell Creek Formation shown in Prehistoric Park is like how it's shown in Walking with Dinosaurs 7 years earlier. It was made by Tim Haynes and Impossible Pictures, so it makes some sense. But it's still incorrect, as the area of Western North America at the time was a very lush and tropical environment, like in today's Florida Everglades. While in the open, Nigel then stumbles upon a group of Tyrannosaurus rex. They play fight, trying to hone their skills for when it truly matters. The T-Rex move on, and so does Nigel. In the morning, the T-Rex begin a hunt of a huge herd of Triceratops. Nigel, using his time travel device, sends back one of the Triceratops to the present, where Keeper Bob brings the Triceratops, which they name Theo, to his new habitat. Then once again, Nigel intervenes in a T-Rex hunt and saves a group of ornithomimimus, the same one as earlier, and sends them back to the present as well. Although the mother T-Rex is still able to grab one of the ornithomimimus and kill it. The mother then brings the kill back to her babies, but upon arriving at the nest, another T-Rex fights the mother T-Rex, kills her, and steals the kill, leaving the two T-Rex chicks orphaned. Then, as the meteor slams into the Yucatan Peninsula, Nigel is able to coax the young T-Rex, who they call Terrence and Matilda, into the time portal and send them back to the present. Then they close the portal while the world they just left goes up in smoke. So that's where episode 1 ends. A few gripes I have with the episode includes the T-Rex, which Nigel claims could run at speeds of 40 miles an hour. I don't know what the writers were smoking, because that's just ludicrous. The T-Rex design is also too slender, not being bulky enough, as the Tyrant King would have looked in real life.
Damn, boy, he's thick, boy!
Another problem I have is the young Triceratops look almost exactly like the adults, just smaller. This is just incorrect, as young Triceratops have their horns point more backwards and then get straighter as they get older. My last problem I have is that the writers show Triceratops as living in these huge herds. No massive trike bone beds have been found, although small family groups have. It is unclear how big these groups could have gotten, but for now it seems to be just a few. I won't mention lips or shrink-wrapped dinosaurs, as I covered those things in my Walking with Dinosaurs versus Prehistoric Planet review. Shameless plug here, but link will be in the description for that video. Go check it out. Episode 2, A Mammoth Undertaking, is one of the better episodes in the series. We follow Nigel as he travels back in time about 10,000 years ago in Europe to save the quote-unquote last of the mammoths. Although it makes for a riveting narrative, mammoths persisted much longer than 10,000 years ago. On Wrangel and St. Paul Island, they were able to survive up until about 4,000 years ago. The first animal that Nigel comes across is a Eurasian cave bear, because Nigel, rather stupidly, I must say, ventured into a Pleistocene cave. The show does something very interesting. When Nigel escapes on his snowmobile, he claims that scientists thought that the cave bear went extinct earlier in time, but apparently they had persisted on to the end of the Pleistocene. I don't know why they would do this, other than to shove animals in a certain area to make it look cooler, even if they didn't actually live in that time. The cave bear is believed to have gone extinct about 24,000 years ago, so quite a bit before the events of episode 2. I am a fan of the cave bear design in the show. It certainly looks the part and seems to be about the correct size. Nigel then takes a bird's eye view to see where the mammoths might possibly be. Then he makes his way to an open clearing where he thinks he might find a mammoth. He does, finding an injured mammoth next to her dead companion, being killed by human hunters. The humans that came from the future then make some emergency health care on the mammoth, who they call Martha. She gets free health care, but no, we can't have that in real life. Sad. The humans from the future are on edge, however, as a group of paleo-human hunters are on the outskirts of the time travelers' camp, looking for a way to kill the mammoths so they can get food. Also, Nigel, maybe don't ride a snowmobile where paleo-humans are who make cave drawings. Next thing we'll know, we're going to find some cave drawings of snowmobiles on ancient cave art. After a while, the treatment begins to work and Martha is on her feet. The time travelers then get a time machine going and send Martha back to the future. They get Martha into an enclosure and everything seems fine for now, until she's not really eating her food and she's clinically depressed. Basically every teen girl nowadays. Nigel then has to travel back to about 100,000 years ago when mammoths were abundant on the open prairies and plains versus 10,000 years ago when mammoths were dying out due to the forests replacing the plains, getting rid of the mammoth's food source of grass. I love how Prehistoric Park does this, as it really shows off seemingly how quickly things can change due to climate change. Oh, but I forgot. It's not supposed to exist. Back on track here, Nigel comes across an elasmotherium, which is living alongside the mammoths. It's nice how the creators don't just recycle the woolly rhino model from Walking with Beasts. There is some debate if the elasmotherium would have had a gigantic horn on its head or if it would have had a boss. Prehistoric Park obviously goes for the horn side of the debate, even though I don't think it was a debate in 2006. Ah well. Nigel finds out what's wrong with Martha, and it's because she needs a herd. So because the show is in Africa, Nigel is able to make Martha accustomed to a nearby elephant herd and get her into the group. Episode 3, Dinobirds, is an amazing episode. Nigel and his team go back in time to the early Cretaceous period China to catch himself a Microraptor. I love the Microraptor design, even if it's not correct nowadays. The filmmakers did their best for the time. In an interview with Dino Guy, who you need to check out by the way, absolutely loving the Manny Interpretations of series, but in the interview with Dino Guy and Nigel Marvin, our favorite time traveler, sorry Jake,
we're going back in time to the first Thanksgiving to get turkeys off the menu.
Anyway, Nigel says that the filmmakers plucked a dead magpie they found and put those feathers onto the Microraptor prosthetic. In real life, however, scientists have figured out what a Microraptor looked like. Using pigmented melanosomes found in dinosaurs, scientists have been able to discern a few small dinosaur colors. Microraptor was found to have a feather covering that is comparable to modern-day crows and ravens, being a shiny, iridescent black. The first dinosaur that Nigel comes across is the Incisivsaurus and looks very good for the time. Might be a little shrink-wrapped and needs some more feathers, but still looks very good. Then one of Nigel's group gets attacked by 4 Maylong. Looks like the Troodon model from episode 6, but we'll get there when we get there. They are able to fight off the dinosaurs, but they steal the food and resources, so now the crew have nothing. Nigel and his crew then stumble across a Microraptor feeding on the ground. Nigel tries to get it, but fails, so he and his crew set up an elaborate trap, but the cheeky Incisivsaurus run through the trap and set it off, and Nigel isn't even able to grab one of the dinosaurs. Then Nigel and his crew find a group of dead dinosaurs, the Maylong from earlier. Then this ometer thing goes off because there's a lot of carbon dioxide in the air because of a local volcano who was being very active right about then, and his team rushed to get to higher ground. Back at Prehistoric Park, Terrence and Matilda have begun to fight, and the team tries to spray water on the Rexes to get them to stop, but Matilda ends up injuring Terrence in the struggle. Back in Prehistoric China, I know we're kind of flip-flopping a bit, but on track here, Nigel and his crew have gotten to higher ground. They then follow a group of unnamed titanosaurs, which the episode never explicitly names, but based off of the location and time the episode takes place in, we can assume that we are looking at Dongbei Titan. The reason it was unnamed was because Dongbei Titan was named a year after the documentary's release. The documentary then shows the Microraptor eating grubs and insects that were brought to the surface in the Titanosaur's footprints. This is incorrect, as we now know that Microraptor was eating mammals, birds, and fish, as remains of these have been found in the creature's remains. Nigel, using a net gun, is able to ensnare one of the Microraptors. Then the volcano lets off a huge eruption, and the Dongbei Titan go berserk as they are scared. The sauropods almost trample Nigel and the Microraptor, but they end up unscathed. The volcano is pouring down ash, and with the time travel device, Nigel is able to send the huge herd of sauropods back to the future, and Keeper Bob is forced to get them into suitable habitat. Episode 4, Saving the Sabertooth, starts off with a documentary showing us a very simplistic version of the Great American Interchange. When both North and South America joined together, animals began traversing across new lands. The North American animals were better equipped to take over the new land, and they took dominance over the South. Just like in real life, except the South isn't trying to keep slavery as a thing. Great thing by the documentary to do this, and it's very informative. This is when the documentary calls a South American terror bird about 10 feet tall. If you have watched Walking with Beasts, you probably know what I'm about to say. Here comes the rant. I don't know where the BBC came up with this fake terror bird, but no forest rocket lived in South America at the time of the episode. It's the same in Walking with Beasts, where there is a terror bird living in South America, basically playing second fiddle to Smilodon. This is not the case. Now there was a terror bird living in North America, being Titanus, but Titanus has only been found in the US. Titanus is also specifically told of in the Walking with Beasts documentary.
While these terror birds eat Smilodon's leftovers, their cousins are running riot in Texas and Florida.
The terror birds in both documentaries are probably meant to be Forest Raucus. There's just one itty-bitty problem. Forest Raucus lived about 9 million years before the episode takes place, and it was only about 8 feet tall, not 10. So the writers just basically made up a terror bird just so that they could add a cooler animal to the roster, even if it's at the wrong time. A lot like what they did with the cave bear in episode 2. Nigel drives his Jeep into the time machine and sends him to the past. The second he gets through the portal, he is driving through a herd of Toxodon and trying to evade them like it's a game of Crash Bandicoot. Prehistoric Park shows the Toxodon as being semi-aquatic, which was thought of by Charles Darwin, who had them at an early sauropod-type lifestyle. Alas, this is most likely not the case, and they would have been primarily land-loving. Nigel then accidentally upsets one of these ungulates, and they just manage to outdrive it in his Jeep. And I'm sorry, but this entire time I've forgotten to mention a character. Suzanne is the Prehistoric Park's lead veterinarian and helps the animals in times of need. Shout out to the actor for being so good at looking like a real veterinarian while working on animatronics. She's a great character that I will mention later on. Nigel then watches from afar as a female Sabertooth successfully hunts and kills one of the Toxodon by putting it down with a bite to the neck with those huge sabers. Then a whole family of these felids come over and begin to eat their food. Once they're done, the fake terror bird comes along to eat the Smilodon scraps, like in Walking with Beasts. Then it gets promptly fought off by the cats. Nigel is then able to grab a piece of dead Toxodon and lure the giant bird to chase him. Then he gets them back through the already set up time machine and sends them to the future. Then Nigel and Suzanne both go and see the new ornithomimus babies that have hatched. And you know what? They look kind of cute. Nigel and Kenyan wildlife conservationist Saba Douglas Hamilton travel back around 10,000 years ago to save the last of the Sabertooths in South America. Nigel is surprised because every large animal from earlier in the episode has died out. Nigel and Saba find dung from a Sabertooth, and so they continue their hunt for the last ones remaining. The only way the Smilodon has survived is on a very small living of deer, which will not sustain them, and is very difficult to catch. Nigel then grabs an armadillo. You gotta love it. This man is a modern-day hero. Nigel and Saba come across the corpse of the dead Smilodon cub, as it has died of starvation. Saba, then walking through the bush, comes across the female Sabertooth. She stands on a rock looking at her until Saba's walkie-talkie starts blaring loudly and the big cat leaves. The female Smilodon then fails at hunting a very obviously CGI deer. Saba and Nigel know they have got to get the male, female, and last remaining cub Sabertooth back to Prehistoric Park before they die of starvation. Oh yeah, there's a male Smilodon, too. He pissed on Nigel's trail cam earlier. Then Nigel and Saba find the dead baby like the other as it died from starvation. Dang, 2 dead babies were following in the footsteps of WWD.
See that? He's dead. Dead. Another dead one. Deady. Deadified. 2 more dead. Dead from the neck up. Dead from the neck down. But that's life.
Saba tranquilizes the female so they can get it back to the park. They also trank the male, and they're both in side-by-side enclosures at Prehistoric Park. Episode 5, The Bug House. The episode starts with Terrence and Matilda fighting because Matilda broke through her separate enclosure to get to Terrence. Talk about a hater. Bob is able to tranquilize Matilda, but Terrence has been severely injured and will need immediate medical attention. I'm going to say it right now, this episode is probably my least favorite episode. It's a clear holdover from Walking with Monsters, which came out a year before Prehistoric Park. The Meganeura and Arthropleura are just a few of the animals that were reused for this documentary. It just kind of felt like they didn't have the money for a new episode, and so they just used the Walking with Monsters was doing. Anyway, Nigel goes through the time machine and almost immediately gets his Jeep stuck in a bog, so Nigel and his crew abandon the car for now. Back at the park, Suzanne and the veterinary team are working hard to keep Terrence the T-Rex alive. What a job done by the actors here, as they were able to work around the beautiful T-Rex animatronic, or puppet, or whatever. It makes it so much better than them acting with nothing, and then having to add it in post-production. Good job, Prehistoric Park. The Dongbei Titan at the park continued to wreak havoc and destroy buildings, making Keeper Bob very mad. Nigel then comes across the Arthropleura, and the millipede rears back to look Nigel in the eye. This is exactly the same shot as when the Arthropleura has a confrontation with the amphibian in Walking with Monsters. Hey, at least he doesn't get killed this time.
Its best defense. Unless it gets split.
He was special.
The animal in this episode that Nigel desperately wants to add to Prehistoric Park is the Meganeura, a giant dragonfly look-alike. In reality, even though Nigel calls it a dragonfly, Meganeura is part of the family Meganosoptera, which modern-day dragonflies are not a part of. They are part of the family Anisoptera. So no, Meganeura is not just a giant dragonfly. Nigel tries to ensnare a Meganeura with a net, but it gets away. At nighttime, Nigel and his camera film a huge 1-meter-long scorpion crawling across the humans' camp. Then, for some reason, Nigel lets the scorpion then crawl over a sleeping member of his crew. That's a surefire way to get yourself a smack-dab lawsuit. Nigel then uses the water gun to shoot down a Meganeura, so it's stunned, and then comes in with a butterfly net to whisk it away. That's when Nigel gets attacked by a Crassigyrinus. Crassigyrinus was a very primitive amphibian with shrunken limbs to help swim through the carboniferous waters. Nigel lets the amphibian go and swims away. Back at the park, the female and male Smilodon are introducing each other after the park staff opened the gate so they could maybe make more babies and save the species. The Sabertooths aren't attacking each other, so that's good for the park staff. Nigel evades and grabs an extremely deadly scorpion by the tail. Nigel then, because I don't know why you would handle an animal of that kind, he gets stung. A fire starts, and Nigel, on the way out, manages to wrangle the Arthropleura and bring it back to Prehistoric Park. Suzanne assesses Nigel's injury, and it's not bad. Nigel will be alright. And to end the episode, Nigel and Suzanne release the now healthy Terrence into a brand new enclosure where he will be safe from his sister. Episode 6, Super Croc, sends Nigel back to Campania, North America, specifically Texas, as Nigel is searching for the so-called largest croc ever. The croc in question is Deinosuchus. I'm going to say it now, so not to drag it out. Deinosuchus is very likely to be not the largest crocodile ever. Actually, Deinosuchus isn't a crocodilian. It's actually more closely related to a modern-day alligator, being in the subfamily Alligatoroidea. Small nitpicks aside, it is much more likely that the Miocene South American Purosaurus, or Purosaurus, which was about 12.5 meters long, or about 41 feet, and weighed 5.6 metric tons, whereas the Deinosuchus was about 10.6 meters, or about 35 feet in length, and weighed about 5 tons. Prehistoric Park puts Deinosuchus at a massive 50 feet in length, which has never been an estimate for the giant alligator. The first animal Nigel sees on his expedition is a pair of Parasaurolophus in the dry desert. This is weird because it looks like Prehistoric Park took inspiration from modern-day Texas, except this is not the case. Campanian Texas was a much more tropical, marshy atmosphere, which suited Deinosuchus perfectly. It is nice how Nigel informs the audience that Parasaurolophus were primarily quadrupedal, although Prehistoric Park has its front legs way too skinny. Definitely needs some more meat on them bones. This is when a pair of Albertosaurus arrive on the scene, ready to hunt these hadrosaurs.
What?
That's right, Albertosaurus in Texas. Where do you think Albertosaurus would live?
Canada.
Just recently, indeterminate Tyrannosauroid fossils have been found in Campania, Texas. However, since these were just found in August 2025, we don't know what species it might belong to. I suspect, however, that it was most certainly not Albertosaurus, and most likely a new species of Tyrannosaur, although it might, emphasis on might, be an example of Tyrannosaurus micriensis found in the southern parts of the USA. All just hypothetical, though. Also, the Albertosaurus look almost identical to the T-Rex design in the show. Not exactly what you want. Also, even though T-Rex and Albertosaurus were close relatives, Albertosaurus was in the Albertosaurini subfamily with Gorgosaurus, and T-Rex in the Tyrannosaurinae subfamily with Nanuqsaurus. They both, however, were a part of the Tyrannosauridae family. That was a lot of facts. Quickly moving on, back at Prehistoric Park, the Smilodon have had cubs, and they do look pretty dang cute. Since Texas was on the edge of the western interior seaway, Nigel gets to the beach and then has a bunch of Parasaurolophus run around his car. We see the pterosaur Pteranodon, who is fishing on the ocean. The overall design is okay, and it's eating correctly, but it's betrayed just a bit too late in time. Pteranodon went extinct about 80 million years ago, just about 8 million years before the events of Episode 6. Then we see a giant Deinosuchus leap up and grab a Pteranodon out of thin air. Damn. We check in on Martha the Mammoth, and she is not doing too good in her home with the African elephants. For some reason, the elephants don't like and trust Martha. Is this some form of elephant racism? I don't know.
I hate you because you look different.
Then Nigel, stupidly, starts rafting in an inflatable boat through the swamp. This is when a Deinosuchus shows up and almost eats Nigel, but he's able to get away. Then Nigel sees a whole group of these giant gators basking in the sun, together like modern crocs today. One of the young and rather dumb hadrosaurs is drinking the water when a Deinosuchus pops out of the water and pulls the Parasaurolophus to a watery grave. The Deinosuchus in the show death rolls its victims to break it into smaller pieces. This is likely because Deinosuchus anatomy seems to support a death roll move. Then Nigel comes across a group of Troodon. If you know, you know, but Troodon is most likely not a species. At least, most certainly not a species in Texas. It's a whole conundrum, but for a simplified version, the OG Troodon fossils were named after a single tooth. I don't know what dummy decided to name a species after one tooth, but it's screwed up paleontology for a while, as a multitude of Troodontids have been debated over the years of being the genus Troodon formosus. Also, oh my god, the Troodon looked disgusting. It's featherless, has pronated wrists, and in general just looks gross. Then a trio of Albertosaurus get fought off. They're killed by a group of Deinosuchus. Then Nigel and his crew trap a Deinosuchus in a pre-made trap and transport it back to Prehistoric Park. Then, back at Prehistoric Park, the Dongbei Titan crash through and destroy a number of enclosures, including the T-Rex. Havoc ensues as the T-Rex starts to hunt the elephants, until Martha the depressed mammoth steps up and defends her herd. Long enough until Nigel can distract Matilda the T-Rex. The T-Rex chases Nigel into the Deinosuchus enclosure, and the giant alligator almost snags Matilda. Nigel is able to lead Matilda back into an enclosure that keeps Matilda in there. Then, to end the show, we see the animals. We see the Ornithomimus and their young chilling, the Smilodon cubs playing around. Martha the mammoth has been integrated back into the elephant herd, and because of Martha's bravery, has earned a spot in the herd. Oh, and forgot to mention it, but Nigel was able to grab a Troodon on his way out of Texas, and everything is fine again. And that is where Prehistoric Park ends. Prehistoric Park might be my favorite paleo documentary ever. I love WWD and Prehistoric Planet, but Prehistoric Park is just so nostalgic and has such a great story. I don't have any pictures of it, but if you pause Prehistoric Park on the DVDs, it shows a fact card of the animal that was being showcased at that time. A really small touch, but shows that the Prehistoric Park crew really cared. The story is just magnificent. Even if some of it isn't very accurate, I would watch it just for the narrative, and also because Nigel Marvin is an awesome dude. Another thing I appreciate about Prehistoric Park is that there aren't many instances of reused models besides in Episode 5, and they try to incorporate new animals that weren't a part of the Walking With trilogy. Some reused models are fine, like the Mammoth in Episode 2 or the Arthropleura in Episode 5. Those models are basically perfect, so there's no reason to make new ones. Some, like in Episode 2, having the cave bears of the cave lion in Walking with Beasts, or having Toxodon in Episode 4 instead of the Macrauchenia in Walking with Beasts, or having Elasmotherium instead of the woolly rhino also in Walking with Beasts. My favorite episode is probably Episode 6, Super Croc. It's close between that and Episode 2, Mammoth Journey. The title of the video is The Brilliance of Prehistoric Park, and that's because it is. A brilliant documentary that should definitely get more praise. That's going to do it for this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and check out my social medias. See you guys next time.
That's all, folks.